Scene 1, take 12. Buongiorno. In this video, I'm going to share with you my complete roadmap for learning Italian from total beginner to totally fluent, so that at each step along the journey, you know exactly what things you should be studying and what tools and resources are there to help you. Now, to make this easier to understand visually, I've created two characters, Tommaso and Gaia, each with different goals in Italian. Tommaso really wants to one day live in Italy, and so he needs to be able to read and write and speak fluently, versus Gaia just wants a bit more casual conversation with her extended family. For each section, I'm going to show you what skills you should be learning and also what tools are available to help you. For example, learning the numbers is a skill, and the tool that can help you with this is just Google or ChatGPT. Let's get started. Professional Italian textbooks that are used in universities all over the world right now typically split their Italian learning into two sections. One as a grammar textbook that teaches you the basics of making sentences, how to talk about the present, past and the future, how to talk about different people, and more of a student workbook that teaches you to practice what you've learned, doing things like conversational exercises, maybe labeling the different meats and cheeses in a shop, these kind of things that really involve you in the real Italy. I think these are great because they're not just about, learning Italian, but they're actually about becoming Italian. So I'm going to split my teaching into these two sections, grammar and usage. Of course, I'll also mention that, I'm not the language police. There will be some things that I've missed out. People will disagree with me about when certain things should be learned. But what I really wanted to do is just give you some structure, because a lot of my students do complain that they have no structure, and these are the steps that I do go through with my students to get them to fluency. Imagine being able to describe your day in Italian. Things that happened this morning, things that happened at lunchtime, things that happened in the evening or will happen in the evening. Conjugation is just a tool that allows you to do that. Now, if you've never heard of this word before, conjugation, don't worry, I promise it's a lot less scary than it sounds. Basically, conjugation is all about verbs. Now, verbs are action words, doing words, things like swim, run, laugh, think, all of these words, and by definition, in English and very, very, very heavily in Italian, every sentence that comes out our mouth must have a verb. So it's a really good place to start with learning Italian. The word conjugation refers to how a verb's ending might change depending on who we're talking about. So for example, if I wanted to say I think, I would say io penso with an o on the end. But if I wanted to say we think, I would say noi pensiamo with a iamo on the end. Now, at the beginning, it will feel like there are way too many rules to keep track of, but as you go through the exercises and just practice doing this, you will always get better at this every time you do it. Now, this is a topic that will stay with you all the way to fluency. You're going to be doing conjugation in different forms all throughout your Italian learning journey, and every single time you want to make an Italian sentence. So you will need to practice this. Now, two fantastic resources you can use for this are this video here that I made explaining the complete beginnings of conjugation, talking about present, we talked about the past, a bit about the future as well, and also this website, which I'll mention several times throughout this video, coniugazione.it, which is basically just a conjugation checker. They've just put loads of tables of different verbs on there. You can just hop on there for free, search any verb you want, and it will look like there are loads and loads of different tables to learn. Don't worry, you will slowly pick these up. Italian, like many European languages, has masculine words and feminine words. Now, if you've never seen this before, it might seem very strange that a table is masculine and a plant is feminine, but that's just how it is. There's not really any rhyme or reason to it. It's just something that we need to learn. However, the plus side of this is that it's actually very useful. Once we learn these rules, it makes it easier to make full sentences, especially with describing words, because they all need to match whether the word is masculine or feminine. For some hard and fast rules, I've put a table on screen now that you can take a screenshot of and use that when you need to. Otherwise, check out teacher Stefano's video where he explains it in detail here. Think about in Italian how great it would be and how polished you would sound to even get the small details right. Sadly, articles have nothing to do with reading newspapers about cars or gardening, but articles are the different ways that you say the and a and an in Italian. Now there are a lot of these, okay? In English we have one. We say one word for the and one word for a. In Italian there are at least 7 different ways to say the and a couple more to say a as well. So there are going to be some rules to learn here. Now I've got a whole video about this where I go around my house explaining how we use these words with different objects, so you can see how this works in a real life setting. Alternatively, I'll also put a table on screen now with some of the different ways to say the, so just have a look there, take a screenshot as you need to. Next up are pronouns. Now, unless you want to be completely egotistical and just talk about yourself in Italian, you will need to learn how to talk about other people. Now, pronouns are exactly the way we do that. If I say lui, you know I'm talking about him. If I say loro, you know I'm talking about they. Now, they're fairly easy to learn and you'll often see them in sentences next to verbs, which are action words, and they will really help just cement in your memory when they go together in a pair. Check out this great video by Professor Dave where he explains it a little bit technically, but you should still be able to follow on in a nice table. Greetings are simple, and having a few in your arsenal really goes a long way to helping you sound more Italian. Think about this in English. At least in the UK, sometimes we say hey, sometimes we say hello, sometimes we say what's up, sometimes we say all good, sometimes we say what's going on. Now all of these actually have their own appropriate reply, and it's the same in Italian. So it's important to learn a few different greetings and also the replies that do go with them. I'll put a list on screen now of the different greetings that you can use and maybe a couple of replies to each, and you can also check out this video by Professor Dave. Now, when it comes to numbers, think about being easily able to talk about different times, different prices, different weights at the supermarkets, different numbers of stops on the train. These kind of things are really going to help you out in day-to-day Italian. If you're going for fluency, I'd also suggest taking the time to learn to read in Roman numerals. They're not that common, but they do crop up in some signs and museums, this kind of thing, and most Italians do know how to decode these, so I would suggest learning these if you want to really live in Italy. Now, make sure you also take the time to cover things like prices and money in this section, and they'll just help you be more confident and make sure that you don't get taken advantage of as a tourist. A great tool to learn these is simply Google. I'm sure there are lists of numbers just out there. And also this great teacher by Manu, I'm going to link it down in the description. You want to know how to use phrases like come stai or non lo so in the right moments. Ideally, you'll also understand all the grammar that goes into these phrases. Otherwise, you'll just kind of be parroting something back that you don't really understand. And the danger with that is if somebody throws you a curveball in Italy and maybe just changes something slightly, you won't really know what to do because you've just learned a set phrase. This is why understanding the grammar is really important. However, it's also useful to just have a bank of common phrases that you can start to piece together the structure of a conversation. Obviously things like hello, goodbye, good morning, good evening, how are you? These kind of things are just great to know and they won't change that much in fairness, so I'd recommend checking those out. So I'm going to link this video here. It's a little bit slow paced, but if you follow along you will learn a bunch of really useful stuff, or you could even just ask ChatGPT to give you many different translations of these common phrases that you can just have as a bank. Now, if you've learned all of this in the beginner section, you're ready to start adding days and time into your vocabulary. By now, you will have also learned about the future tense in conjugation, so you'll be able to start talking about plans for the future, next week, tomorrow, these kinds of things as well. Now, the days are fairly simple. The times are also okay. Just make sure that you also learn all of the o'clocks and how to say things like quarter past, quarter to, half past, things like this, as well as a difference between casual time, like when you're talking to a friend, and a bit more formal time, like at a train station or in a legal report, anything like this. And there's a video that I'm going to link on screen, which you can also check out about this. Okay, so we're out of the basics now, and we're really moving into the improver territory where you are simply going to need to learn a few more tenses. Now, the good news is that the process for doing this is relatively simple. it's just going to be look up a table from ChatGPT or coniugazione.it, do 500 exercises to master it, which you can get from ChatGPT, and rinse and repeat. So here, we start to explore different kinds of present tense, like the gerundio and the present indicativo, or we start to look at different kinds of the past tense, like the imperfecto or the passato prossimo, doing questions on those, rinse and repeat. Now, there are lots of videos on YouTube already talking about the different tenses, which you can look up. I'll link a couple of them in the description. There are quite a few, so I'm not going to give an exhaustive list. And if you've gotten to this point in Italian, you probably either have a tutor or a really good study book, so I'd suggest consulting those. Now, I will also just put on screen, how I make my homework and the example of homeworks that I use and how I get these from ChatGPT, the specific prompt that I use, so you can just copy and paste those and try and get similar results, okay? Now, these are two words that are really going to push your Italian forwards. Ci and ne, they're easy to learn, but quite hard to master. And again, there's a seemingly endless deluge of rules that comes with these. Now, I'm generally not in favor of learning Italian by just, studying rule after rule after rule, because when you're in a situation in real life, you're not just going to think, oh, what's rule 26 about this that I need to remember? So I'd suggest, again, lots of practice here, and a fantastic book that I have to recommend is this book I found on Amazon. It's just a couple of pounds or a few dollars. It's really not that much money, but it's excellently written. And, the person who wrote it, the author, I've never heard of them before, but I've been using this book with my students. I think it's fantastic. So I'll link that down as well, and you can pick it up. Of course, there are going to be many different guides online, so do have a look. Be aware that there are a lot of rules and a lot of the uses for these two words. You're going to kind of learn a set phrases like, vuoi andarci, vuoi parlarne. These kind of things that do form kind of set phrases that kind of go together. Even if they don't make sense, or even if you don't understand exactly why, I'd suggest just thinking of them as going as a set phrase, and you can kind of use that. Learning Italian for me, I really reached a point where I tried to stop questioning things and start just accepting them. Now, I'm not saying just follow blindly whatever you hear, anywhere on the internet, including here on my channel, but, so do think for yourselves. But, really when it comes to learning Italian, sometimes rather than just asking, why is it this, why is it this, why is it this, and trying to get to the bottom of that, it's better to just say, okay, this is the rule, let me just try and use it and try and copy it, because otherwise you kind of cross a bit more into like history of linguistics and more etymology than actually learning Italian. So just a small tip for you there as well. Now, a big difference between English and Italian is the use of reflexive verbs. This is something that we don't really see in English, but in Italian it's used all the time. And it's fantastic because once you start practicing this, you're not only practicing pronouns, you're also practicing sentences, you're also practicing conjugating different verbs in different tenses, which is just a great way to improve your Italian really to that top level. Now, remember when you're learning these that you should conjugate them not just in the present tense, but in all tenses that you've learned so far. It's like if any of you have learned an instrument, they always tell you to practice this in all scales or all keys, whatever. And it's something that I never did. I could never be bothered. I just picked my favorite one and learnt that. But really, I'm telling you to do it now. So if you can muster it, do try and conjugate them in as many tenses as possible. I'm going to put some common ones on the screen now. Otherwise, check out this video by Michelle down below. Now, the prepositions. These maybe have an even more fearsome reputation than ci and ne, and these are really words that tie in your sentences together, and they're really the glue that holds sentences in place. These are words like between, with, on, at, of, these kind of words that really you need to know. Now, you probably will have looked at by now every other part of a sentence. You will have looked at verbs through your work on conjugation. You will have looked at nouns through your work on masculine and feminine words and making the plural, this kind of thing. So prepositions are really the last little bit, I think, that you need to start stringing together longer and longer phrases. Now, they do have a long list of rules that don't really make sense in English. They seem to contradict a lot of the time. So again, I would suggest just trying not to question and just doing it. Just practice using them. A lot of them have these kind of set phrases that they do just go with, which is amazing. And yeah, just give that a go. A fantastic book that I would recommend here is by the same author who did the Cheat and Near books. And again, it's just a really friendly explanation of how to use these. I use this with my students, so please do check that out as well. I will also just add here that trying to kind of rationalize everything in English isn't going to make too much sense with prepositions. So try to just think in Italian and use these in the context that you've learned in Italian. Let's take a bit of a break from the video. I'm just about to start filming the second half. This is maybe 10 or so days after what you've just watched. I've finished editing it now, which I'm really happy with, so it's time to get filming again. And I've just now figured out that I've turned on this really nice cinematic blur effect on my iPhone. You might be able to see the background is just has a little bit of a softer focus when it's focused on my face, which mimics what you might see on a more professional camera, and I think it looks nice. So I'm an absolute idiot for only figuring this out now, but I might also be a genius for figuring it out before I finish the end of the video. So drop me a like to reward my epic camera skills, and let's get back into the video. Ciao again. So I just finished filming the section that you're about to watch, and I just wanted to say really quickly that this light, I'm sorry, it does flicker a little bit. When it gets to the purple and blue cycle, it does flicker a little bit. So try to just look at me, try not to look at that. It will be solved when I can afford a proper camera and I can change the rate that the camera films at. So I just wanted to leave a quick note out there to say sorry. Enjoy the video. Okay, let's try experimenting with a new camera angle for a little bit. So by now in Italian, you will have picked up some vocabulary just from different things you will have been doing. Maybe you work with a teacher, maybe you're reading or watching videos, this kind of stuff. You will have picked up a large amount of vocabulary. But what is key if you really want to get to advanced Italian is to really start massively increasing the number of words available to you in your repertoire. There are about 20 to 30,000 words that are commonly used in everyday conversation, but according to the Grande Dizionario della Lingua Italiana, there are actually about 300,000 total words in the Italian language. Think about words in English that are outside of their everyday vernacular, but are still used in conversations that people will understand. So words like cardiovascular or placebo, quantum, dividend, ecosystem. You need to develop the equivalent knowledge of these in Italian. And a great place to do this is just by reading a lot. So I'd say start with children's books, you know, some classic fairy tales, Pinocchio, these kind of things, classic Italian stories. You can sign up to Corriere della Sera. They're an Italian newspaper. They actually have a newsletter you can sign up to with different categories like fashion or beauty, I think these kind of things. Of course, with, you know, breaking news as well. Yeah, I have a screenshot on screen of how to sign up for that. While I was at uni as well, I also kept a massive list of words. It wasn't organized at all. It was just every time I had a lesson and I learned a new word, I just wrote it down in the margin, and then I went home and added it to my laptop. And after 3 years, that list got pretty long. And occasionally what I would do is I would just scroll through it and look at words that I hadn't seen in a long time. So again, I'll pop that up on screen to show you how I thought about this at university, but just keeping any kind of list or flashcards or whatever you can do to get more niche knowledge will be fantastic. Obviously, again, you know, there's no point you learning every medical term if you're not a doctor or interested in that at all. But what you could be doing is, if you have a particular hobby, such as, you know, whatever we mentioned, I think gardening or cars earlier, then you can make sure that you know the specific terms for those. A big complaint that I get from my Italian students is that they can understand me when I speak to them slowly in lessons in isolated sentences that, you know, we might say a sentence and then stop and explain it, or we might say 2 or 3 sentences and stop and explain it, or we might even go into a paragraph and they might get the general gist. But then when they sit down at the dinner table with the nonna or someone, then they just can't keep up with all the Italian that's flying around. There's a lot of gesticulating, all of this stuff going on. So when it comes to addressing that, the good news is that it does get better with time. The bad news is that it kind of only gets better with time. The things that you can do to practice your listening, I would say, are just listening to music. You know, there are a fantastic catalogue of Italian songs, from modern pop to some of the classics. You know, my dad used to have an Italian restaurant and we used to play a lot of old Italian classics. I might link some of those on screen now so you can have a look. You know, especially on Christmas Eve, he's always singing these songs, so it's good to train the ear. Alternatively, you can listen to the Rai radio. So Rai is a big broadcasting corporation in Italy. It's kind of, like the BBC, everyone listens to them. And they actually have a radio you can just listen to online. Again, one for breaking news, one for more, regional news, this kind of thing. But just have this on in the background. And the goal with this isn't to understand every single word perfectly, but I think really just make sure that you are absorbing that Italian and just listen out for key phrases like, I don't know, they might start an interview off with a certain phrase, or you might notice a pause after they say a certain word, something like this. So that's a good tip. Okay, now we really want to start joining together the different parts of Italian that we've been learning so far. Your knowledge of verbs and prepositions will really allow you to start putting the glue in between all the different parts of a sentence and go from just saying isolated phrases. Like, for example, you might walk into a restaurant and be able to say, abbiamo una prenotazione, we have a reservation, and then they'll go blah, 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 and then you won't know what to do. But I think just getting the building blocks of that conversation flowing a little bit more is going to be the way to go. What I would suggest to do here, and what worked for me, is really making more of a structure for conversations. So you might write down the phrases that would typically go at the beginning, middle and end. So again, in that restaurant example, that they're going to say, do you have a booking when you walk in? Then they might say something about, is this table okay? And then they might end the conversation by saying something like, have a nice meal, or thank you, or something like this. So you can kind of sketch out those different steps of that conversation and then rely on your knowledge in the moment to just fill in the gaps. So I think that's a really useful exercise. I'll also link a video here. This is a great channel called, I think, Slow Italian or Easy Italian, something like this. But the point is they have slow practice conversations that you can follow along to. So as you're doing this, save some of these as kind of templates, if you like. What you would typically say at the beginning, what you would say at the middle, what you would say at the end, and then obviously things like numbers and common expressions that we covered earlier in the beginner section are going to help you to navigate the rest fluently. So, thinking in Italian is one of my favorite topics to talk about because it represents really a big shift and a big challenge. This is something that you will need to start doing, is stop translating in your head and really start thinking in the language that you're learning. Now, the thing with this is there are some things that just can't be translated or that don't have equivalents in English or that are just confusing in English. So, for example, the use of the word piacere in Italian. If I say mi piace il gelato, what it really means is the ice cream is liked by me. And in English, thinking about this construction and trying to translate it is just strange. I mentioned this earlier, but kind of going down these rabbit holes of trying to ask why every time is actually going to slow you down a bit in Italian. So for something like piacere, just forget about the why in English and just know that in Italian, when you say I like X, you say mi piace X. Something that I'll add here, of course, is this isn't something that you can just learn about once and instantly get, but it is something that you need to start building up over time and really improve those foundational skills that you've been building up until now. Now, I think this is where we're going to leave our poor Gaia behind, because if you're in the conversational space and you just want to be able to speak with your family, you don't really need to go beyond here. Everything that we've covered of the basics of past, present, future, some basic phrases, some conversational structure, you can more or less stop here. So I think we're going to take Tommaso all the way to fluency. Of course, if you want the extra challenge, go for it. But if you're just looking to have that conversational practice, I'd say make sure that you just cover everything we've spoken about in great detail, as much detail as you can, and practice that, for years to come. But you don't really need to go any further than this. So you can shut down this video now and you can go and have a cup of tea and start practicing your Italian. But for the rest of you who really want to get fluent like Tommaso, let's dive in. Okay, we've got two more conjugation tables for you to learn. I know you thought they were finished, but they just never seem to end. The congiuntivo and the condizionale. Now, the congiuntivo translates to the subjunctive in English. It's something that we use to express opinions, desires, hopes, fears, uncertainties, probabilities. I think I said opinions already. These kind of things. It's also a sign of being quite well educated in Italy. So if you're able to use this correctly as a foreigner, then they will respect you a little bit more. Just notice that you've put in that extra flourish to get there. The condizionale is something that should be used for everybody. It's just about making would, should, could statements, this kind of thing as well. Okay, coniugazione.it will give you the verb tables that you need. You can obviously get them from ChatGPT as well. And I'll link this video here, which does talk about how to use the subjunctive in Italian. Okay, passato remoto. I think there are so many different past tenses in Italian, but here we go. So the passato remoto is something that you may have stumbled on accidentally in your journey so far. Now, this is something that is used in Italy when you're looking at formal documents, like, legal documents, this kind of thing, in very kind of educated literature. If you might read literature from the olden times, or, something that's meant to be very grandiose and very literary, you will see this very often. You also hear it very commonly in the south of Italy as a replacement for the passato prossimo. So the passato remoto, again, I won't explain it completely here, but it's typically used to refer to things that happened a very, very long time ago, which we don't really have in English, but it's specifically used for something that happened a very long time ago. So if you're truly set on moving to Italy, particularly being able to read and write in Italian fluently, you will need to learn the passato remoto. Now, while I do think it is something that you can kind of soak up, because, just by reading, because there are so many different exceptions and strange variations to this, I think it's worth looking at some verb tables every now and again and just folding this into your routine of practice. So, as I said, there are many, many exceptions and strange irregularities with the passato remoto. So, it's another list to keep. Every time you see a new passato remoto word, stick it in a list, check it every once in a while, and you will get better with that. I'll link a video on screen now. Now, this is only an Italian audio, but if you have gotten to this advanced stage, then you should be comfortable with this. If not, totally fine. Go back, rewatch this video, and just navigate all the different resources available, and come back to this in a couple of months. Learning Italian is a marathon, not a sprint. Okay, pronominal verbs. These are really the icing on the cake when it comes to your spoken Italian. Shows that you're very, very comfortable with the language, and shows that you can start to use meaning and language, non-literally. You can start to tell jokes, understand sarcasm, give different meanings for words as well. So, as the name suggests, pronominal verbs combine a verb with a pronoun in order to create something totally new and very different from their infinitive variants. For example, the verb cavarsela is a pronominal verb because we have cavare together with se la, something like that. Okay, now if we just say io cavo, this would mean like I dig, I excavate, this kind of thing, versus me la cavo means like I'm smashing it or I'm doing really, really well. So it's not something that you would understand just from looking at the literal words, but it's something that is understood as an idiom or common saying in Italy. So in this section, I'll also just add looking up some common sayings like prendere due pigioni con una fava, like hitting two birds with one bean instead of two birds with one stone. It's something that you should be learning in order to just get to that very natural sounding Italian. I'll stick a video on screen now that you can have a look at some of these. Again, keep a list, okay? You may have Italians in your life from different parts of Italy. This is the beauty of Italian. Some will be more regional variations, some will be things that are accepted on a more national level, and it will be up to you to discover these and enjoy these. Okay, this is one of those things on our list that is not as technically difficult as some of the other constructions we've looked at, like the subjunctive or the passato remoto, but you likely haven't looked at in great detail thus far because there have just been more important things to learn. And this is one of those things that, coupled with the passato remoto, can just really help you impress the native speakers and feel more comfortable and confident in Italian. I'll link another Italian audio video explaining some of these pronouns. Now they're really, really helpful. You can stick them on to the end of verbs, and again, you get a little bit more freedom in constructing your sentences. You're able to put these pronouns, sometimes at the beginning of a verb, separate from a verb, at the end of a verb, etc. So it's worth just exploring your options. You don't want to sound robotic and formulaic when you're speaking Italian. You want to have that flexibility to be able to express yourself in as many different ways as possible. So imagine Italian asks me, Lorenzo, why do you say it's raining cats and dogs? Or, why do I say I'm in a pickle? Or why do I say that that restaurant, wasn't my cup of tea? So, there's no explanation for this. It just is. It's just one of these things that's evolved over the course of the English language, or the British language specifically. It's something that every, Brit will just understand without being able to give an explanation. It just is that way. I don't even need to tell you why these are important to learn in Italian, but it's something that all Italians will understand. So I might stick on screen, some common sayings, but even better than that, I have a list of things that I've been listening to my dad say for the past 5 or 6 years. I think I started keeping this list a very long time ago, and every time my dad just came out with one of these ridiculous dadisms, I would stick them on this list, and they're just, things that are really, really unique to Italy. Some of them may be just unique to him, but, I think most of them would be understood by Italians. So I'd recommend you to keep a very similar list. Writing in Italian, you will need to push your comfort zone. It's something that everybody will have to cross at some point or another, and it's not easy, but if you really want to live in Italy and you want to move on from just texting in Italian or writing a sentence or two in your lessons, you're going to need to get that practice in. And I'll be honest, I sucked at this at the beginning. You will suck at it at the beginning. But it's just something we all have to go through, okay? Ce la passiamo tutti. So when it comes to writing, you want to be flexible, okay? You want to look at emails, texts, magazine articles. There's a reason why so many exams, for example, GCSE Italian exams here in the UK, feature such lengthy writing segments and such random writing segments as well. It's like, when am I ever going to write an email to my aunt asking her about health tips? Okay, never, except in an exam setting. But you will need to have that flexibility in the language. So what I would suggest is having a look at the GCSE Italian exam papers, seeing what kind of writing tasks they ask you to do, and I might, link some of them on screen or provide a download or something. I'll stick something in the description. But my point is that you can fill these out and just get ChatGPT to rate them, and say, how can I make this sound more natural, this kind of thing. So another good tip. So when it comes to advanced learning in Italian, the reason I've included this is you're finally at a level where you want to make a shift from learning Italian to learning in Italian. Okay? So when you're able to read about your interest in Italian, you're practicing the language itself, but also just exploring interests and seeing the world through an Italian perspective. There are going to be just subtle things in the language that will change, that will allow you to express completely new ideas by just learning in Italian. So really, any book is going to be able to help you with this. But, with my students now, with my advanced students, sometimes we'll be learning about poetry, sometimes about construction, sometimes we'll just read a news article out loud in Italian and learn about the world that way. But just spending all this time in Italian is fantastic, because not only do you just practice it unconsciously, you're also doing something productive with your time, and you can pat yourself on the back if you've gotten to this stage. Again, to an Italian, why would we say, how could we explain saying pat yourself on the back? It just doesn't make sense, but it's just one of these British sayings, so you need to learn those Italian equivalents. But what I was talking about is when you can actually start learning in Italian, it's going to be a lot more fluid in order to find out about the world and just continue mastering that language. And last but certainly not least, advanced practice. If you've gotten to this stage in Italian and you've worked so hard to get here, you really need to think about what purpose Italian is serving in your life. There's no point, I think, actually doing all of this advanced study if you're just going to forget about Italian in 2 years. You really need a reason to keep learning Italian. So I'd urge you to consider what role Italian is really playing in your life. Do you have a partner who's Italian who you will speak with on a daily basis? Do you read, genuinely read Italian, most times in a week? Or do you seriously plan to move or live in Italy? Otherwise, I'd say just chill out. There's no need to become a perfect Italian speaker. It's totally fine to just be a Gaia and just chat with Italians. You know, most Italians speak English anyway, you know, nowadays, so unless you're in some tiny village. So it's totally fine to be at that level. And the reason I'm saying this is I have people in my life, you know, for example, my partner or a friend of mine who I met through dance who studied Italian for really 2 or 3 years intensely and now can just barely string a sentence together. And there's not really any point, I think, going through all that effort if you're not going to use it really intensely. So just consider what role Italian is playing in your life. And, you know, it could be a case where you pay 20, 30 pounds a week to a tutor to just talk in Italian for an hour. You know, with my students, I've got a family who I speak with who all log on with me. You know, it's like 4 or 5 of us, and we just chat in Italian once a week, and that keeps it alive, you know, for all of them. Or I have another student where we just read a comic book in Italian every single lesson, and because of that, we're just able to keep it alive. So I'd urge you to consider that. You know, great things here, as I mentioned, the Corriere della Sera newsletter. Just read that newsletter when it comes into your inbox and you're practicing your Italian. Look at the Giallo Zafferano YouTube channel in order to just learn some new recipes and enjoy Italy. If you've made it all the way to the end of the video, then leave a red square emoji down in the comments and I'll show you some love. Thank you so much for checking this out, and I'll see you in the next one.